Hello, and welcome to Cinema Spotlight with Jake and Reuben.
Your regular roundup of all the latest films and re-releases hitting screens this week.
Now, as you can see, we're recording this episode virtually, but don't worry, we're still going to be covering lots of exciting films, including Nightbitch, the new film by Marielle Huller, starring Amy Adams, and which tells the story of the dark side of motherhood.
And we also saw Solo Leveling ReAwakening, the film continuation of the television series, but also a sneak peek into the beginnings of series 2.
We also have On Becoming a Guinea Fowl, the awards garlanded new indie comedy. Or is it in fact a comedy?
And also, do you hear the whispers in the trees? We saw Evan Johnson, Galen Johnson, and Guy Madden's new film, Rumours. As Reuben said, and as you can see, we're doing a scale back episode today because we want to deliver Cinema Spotlight every week to you guys, but sometimes our schedules are a bit all over the place. But as you see, we have our really fake on iron curtains behind us, even if they are CGI and AI or whatever it is. But also, we'd like to give a little shout out to all the up and coming, inspiring young filmmakers out there who'd love to be interviewed on the show. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to talk to you and spotlight you on future episodes of Cinema Spotlight in the coming new year. All you need to do is just email us at cinemaspotlightjakeandreuben@gmail.com. Please, we'd love to hear from you.
And of course, we've also got our show uploaded as a podcast on Spotify. So do go and search that up. If you just search Cinema Spotlight, it will come up. Now, our first film this week is, of course, Nightbitch, Marielle Huller's new film. And she's on a bit of a hot streak, having previously directed Can You Ever Forgive Me? And, of course, the Fred Rogers film, A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood. This stars Amy Adams as an increasingly on-the-edge mother and is adapted from the book of the same name by Rachel Yoder. Now, Jake, I really enjoyed this film. I'll say it from the off, but I've been getting the impression that maybe you didn't. So tell me, what was wrong as far as you were concerned with Nightbitch?
Well, I was sat and watched it. I watched it yesterday, and there was this sense that, and a lot with these films this week, and I'll lay down my sort of through line of this week, that a sense that something was trying to achieve more with what they were doing. And I appreciated the angle. I thought that the angle, because I don't know the book, I haven't read the book. I can read People of Cinema Spotlight, I promise. Yeah, I haven't, and I had no idea what it was going to be about. I saw one trailer and I was absolutely flabbergasted. The marketing of this is ridiculous, like absolutely ridiculous. And kind of some of the film is quite ridiculous. And I really appreciated from the film the way it depicted aspects of motherhood. But that's not all of them. That was my problem with the film, is that some bits were really decently done. I quite like the animalistic ideas, and I liked the general conceit. I enjoyed the idea that she thinks she's turning into a dog, or she is turning into a dog. This is where I get a little distant from the film, because it actually is made very abstract. It's so when I was in the cinema and watching it, I'm like, well, I can see they're physically showing changes of her, almost like the wolf man. And they start showing that as if she physically is turning into it, and like generally perceived in real life on screen as if it is happening. But then also it actually is just an abstract inner feeling and turmoil as well. And they try and balance it, but I don't think they do it very successfully. I think it's awfully off, where the idea of it becoming a dog is more treated as spectacle for the filmmaking, rather than it's actually more animalistic, more primal on the inside. And it sort of doesn't really live up to the absurdity. My main problem comes into those sort of things. I think it does lose it. And I also have a huge problem as well, which is that I think one of the aspects of motherhood that they do try and delve into is very misplaced and doesn't actually register at all. Because I feel like all these women hate their children. And I feel like there's an angle of, I understand the love is missing to me. It really is, that it talks a lot about all these other stages of motherhood, but the thing that could actually connect me to these characters, especially the father character, is that it feels like the love is very surface level. I think there should have been something that was a bit more extreme to show the levels of the feral, sort of, as I said, wolf-like, animalistic, motherly desires to protect and be even more extreme. And I also think that Scoot McNairy's character, terribly performed and terribly written. I think it,
Wow.
yeah, I genuinely do. I feel like I can understand, like, he's not the best husband and dad, but it's just played so bland. And when, again, the realizations later in the film, or sort of when people come to terms with other people's wants and desires, and sort of like people start communicating, the relationship is sort of broken down through lack of communication. And I just feel like he is almost irredeemable to me just watching it. I felt very like, I don't think he actually cares about his wife or his son. He just seems very apathetic, seems very distant from it all. And it really did take it out of me, that this film that's about being a parent. And really, I felt that it just lost it for me. It really did lose it. And maybe that's what it was going for, but because of that, and because of the way they dealt with the more absurd angles of the film, I just was so distant from it. I actually sat and was having not a very enjoyable experience in the cinema. It just felt like it washed over me in quite a negative way. But
Yeah.
I've gone on a bit just because it was so. I've got my own feral urges here, but to rip into a film. But actually, Ruben, please tell me. I'd love to know what
Yeah.
you. Maybe you can change my mind. Maybe you can unlock something that I didn't quite see.
Well, here's the thing. I had such a different experience to you because I felt that the film did a really, really good job of talking about huge topics like, postpartum depression, the way in which society essentially grooms mothers for a role which actually is completely different to the way that society, portrays and builds it up to, and which actually offers them no support. And I thought it had so much on its mind, but was able to address them so effortlessly. I did think it was really funny. I laughed a lot. And for me, the magical realism sequences where she's transforming into a dog and she's frolicking around the park at night with packs of other dogs, all of that to me worked as a kind of externalization of her feeling much more primal, much more connected to the kind of maternal instincts of just like survive, protect. And I thought there are great discussions in there to be had. And I actually think that fathers would benefit from watching this film because I actually think that it does a really good job of talking about the ways in which I think as men, we aren't necessarily able to see certain things that are happening in society because they don't affect us and they are essentially invisible to us. And talking about topics like triple shift, right, where Amy Adams is essentially, she is looking after the house, she is looking after her child, she is looking after her husband, and she is also trying to have a career. All of that stuff I think is really well encapsulated in this kind of fable-like narrative about a woman turning into a dog. And I think it does a fantastic achievement, actually, in that it makes you think, well, is she actually turning into a dog, right? Is she kind of having an American Werewolf in London style transformation? And I actually think the sequence where she first, fully becomes a dog is really well done. I think it did a really good job of tapping into the paranoia and the burnout and the exhaustion of being a parent, where I was going, I don't know what's real. And it put me in the shoes of the character where I just felt like, is she losing her mind? Is this real? Is there an element of magic? What is going on? And so as a result, emotionally, because I think I believed in that central conceit, it really, really worked for me. I thought Amy Adams was absolutely terrific. I don't think she's got a bad performance in her entire, resume. I think she's a brilliant, brilliant actor. And I thought that Scoot McNairy, contrary to you, was absolutely phenomenal because I think that character is so real. There are millions and millions and millions of men exactly like that, and they're not bad men, and they love their children and they love their wife, and I actually think he does love his wife. There's a line at the end which made me tear up where he says, "You're so weird, I love you." And for me, like, that's the heart of the film. It's about family, and it's the way that families can fracture, but they can also come back together. And nobody is perfect. And for sure, he's a very flawed character. But what I love about the film is that it doesn't turn him into anything two-dimensional. It commits to him actually being a really, really believable. He's a bad dad, he's a bad husband, but he's not irredeemable. And the film shows him where he's gone wrong.
See, that's where I think that I completely disagree with you in the sense of whether he's three-dimensional or not. I do believe that Amy Adams's character is very three-dimensional. I do sort of agree on some points that it does have a lot to say and a lot to say about triple shift and the dedication of mothers as everyone does have them, and it does that stress really well. I thought one of the earlier sequences, just some of the montages worked quite well, just to see that that grind of it all.
Yeah.
But I really did think it failed on the husband character because I didn't really feel that his big revelation of love that happens later in the film, his sort of coming to terms with his own failings, was sold to me. I really still think it was more surface level. And maybe we're looking at it from her point of view, and therefore his faults are exemplified. And I can understand that. And there is emotion behind it, but it feels like it's just washed over him. There's no real depth into it. I don't really see him connect with his son. I think I'd prefer a few more scenes of that. Like, even if it's difficult, we have one scene where it shows that he's doing what Amy Adams always does, and it's slightly difficult. But we don't even get to share a scene with him where he's enjoying time with his son before the very end. And I think that there needs to be a full, more rounded understanding from him for his revelation that there's a reason why I love these things, not just, oh, I'm so sorry, I didn't understand how brilliant you were. I find it really like I'd still not want to be with that gentleman because it took him so long to understand it.
Yeah.
It's
But do you not think that's real? Do you not think that's accurate? Because I think that's incredibly accurate. Honestly, I think that. And listen, it's difficult because we are not fathers. I don't believe you have children, right? But so I wonder how I would feel about it if I did. But from my point of view, I think that this is a film which does a really good job of putting you in the perspective of a woman with postpartum depression who is really struggling and isn't getting the support that she needs. And actually, sorry, can I just pick you up on one thing, which is you talked about how you didn't believe that anyone in this film loves their child. And I say, was your heart not warm and fuzzy watching Amy Adam and her son pretending to be dogs and eating dinner out of dog bowls? You know, there is love there. She's just really struggling. But that's real. That is what life is. That happens.
Yeah, okay. Those moments I sort of enjoyed, but I feel that it did a very effective job of showing the difficulties of it. Really did. And I understand. I don't want to wash over. I love my mum, and I know, and I must have been a right pain as a child.
Did this put you off having children? Because it
it actually made me feel like more like actually, yeah, the difficulties, because the actual resolution is not, they don't regret having the child, which is a great resolution, of course, because a lot of these films sometimes skew that way, which was somewhat refreshing. But because of the fact that it was more about her getting in touch with her primal urges and sort of, it felt quite suggestive to the child to force him down this dog route, like she was putting it on him. So it didn't actually feel as naturally, oh, they're just having fun. It felt like she's got this weird demented aspect that she thinks she's turning into an animal and therefore is forcing her son to do the same thing. And I was like, that therefore lost this sense of whimsy, this sense of, oh, we're just playing pretend. It felt maybe a little grooming-y, that they're just sort of pushing it. So my major issue was that not only the dad felt a little unreal or not fleshed out, but I felt that every other side character felt quite stereotypical, felt very, oh, these are the people that are here to make Amy Adams furious and annoyed. The mothers are very stereotypical soccer mom type characters, and her friends from bygone era are typical pretentious without kids or with kids but still thriving, just to infuriate. And to be honest, I'm not sure why Amy Adams surrounds herself with these terrible people. It feels to me, therefore, the film then feels like it's a very selfish problem, that it goes down into her issues. Like, of course, I understand the postpartum depression angle. I think it deals with that relatively well. And she does take initiative later, but it does feel incredibly selfish, her problems. And everything else, it just seems warped, not real, to the point where, is it trying to be, or is it trying to be funny? And I didn't really find their characters very funny because it just was grating. Maybe that was effective, but then as a character study, I felt that detracted from it, that it did just feel like we're just from this one person's perspective and I can't quite trust it. And is that what they want? And if so, it didn't quite connect with me.
Yeah.
It would have worked for you or other people, but I think that was really what disconnected me from it.
Yeah, I think that's fair enough. I think for me, I thought it was funny. I thought it was insightful. I really like the body horror elements of it. And I think a lot of people will watch this and they will say, I really relate to that. I think it will really resonate with a lot of people, men and women. And so, yeah, I think, listen, if this was at Crufts, I think I'm giving it best in show, and you're shoveling it into a poo bag. I think that's how we feel.
No, I thought it was a bit rough. Next, we are thrust into the world of solo leveling ReAwakening. Portals have opened up across the world, and only destined hunters from S rank to E rank can defeat these terrible, ginormous monsters that live beyond these realms. We follow Sung Jin Woo as he secretly develops his skills from a lowly E rank to become the greatest hunter of them all. Now, Reuben, this film that we went to see. I think I should caveat before we talk that this actually is more a recap of series 1 of a TV series and the beginning of series 2. But they have marketed it and they've packaged it as a film, so we as movie reviewers have to talk about it as such. And I think that might direct some of our opinions, but I'd love to know what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, it was a brain melting experience because they drop you in with absolutely no explanation as to what is going on. So, this film, which basically just entirely consists of action sequences, starts off in medias res, in the middle of a fight scene, and I would say probably takes about 20 minutes before you start to be able to put together the pieces as to what is happening. So, I was sat there in the cinema just going like, did I miss half an hour of the film? Because I just couldn't believe that I was supposed to know what was going on, and I thought maybe this is a sequel. I was absolutely baffled by this. I had no idea what was going on, and I thought, is this a film or is this something else? And as you say, I then went and researched it, and I went, oh yeah, it's not a film. It's not a film. It's 10 episodes plus the first 2 episodes of series 2 condensed down into one feature-length 2-hour picture, and that's why halfway through the title comes up. It says season 2, and I was like, what do you mean season 2? I was so confused by this, but it was diverting. So I didn't have a bad time. There was something brilliant about sitting there going, I have absolutely no clue what is going on. But actually, it's kind of cool. So the animation in this is fantastic. They do some really cool, expressive animation in this where, suddenly stuff becomes like line drawings and it's very rough and ready. And I thought that was really interesting. And I have to say, the action is absolutely fantastic. It is really, really, kind of John Wick-esque. Super intense. Unlike John Wick, you don't necessarily know what is happening because it's all such a kind of blur of sound and fury. But it's really kind of visually striking. The kind of soundtrack I also thought was really good, and there are some good kind of needle drops in there. And so I was really surprised that even though I didn't have a clue what was going on for most of this film, and I was just kind of like piecing together the puzzle as we went, I quite enjoyed it in the end. In any conventional sense of the word, it is not a film. But it was quite creative, and I wasn't bored.
No, that's definitely. I was not bored either. That's the thing. I think because of its structure and the fact that it was just episode after episode. But even if they trimmed some of it, they trimmed all the fat, and were just getting to these set pieces, these epic set pieces. I don't say epic in that sense of wow, how cool, but epic in actual scale, like the monsters that they fought, the amount they fought. I've written in my notes here, emo Jesus who has internal video game guidance, screams a lot, kills everything, and is moody.
Can we just talk for a moment about the video game logic of it? Because I thought surely this is a video game, but it isn't. And so I'm sure at some point in the series they explain how the system, they call it, how the system works. But I still don't know how the system works.
That's the problem, as we are in media res, but I thought, oh, because I knew that this was a TV series going in, I was like, oh, so I thought this was going to be a recap of all of series one, but it seems that is it just the tail end? I don't know. And I wanted to go in as this is a film that isn't being packaged as you have to see this as a follow-on, but more as a all-encompassing new viewers of the TV series might want to go in and watch it. But it was like there's this huge, like life-changing battle. Basically, the film begins with the character already having resurrected
Yeah,
from a life like he died. He was dead. And he came back, and that's how he's got these superpowers now. Like they're all superpowered, these hunters. Like they've got extra skill, but he is the lowest of the low, E rank. And yet he's completely indestructible, never puts a foot wrong. I think he's losing some emotions. That's something that he loses throughout the film, but even then, it's not really delved into very deeply. I don't know anime very well, which is why I think it's interesting that you and I are coming in to review this film because I was like, okay, let this be one of my first major cinematic experiences of going to watch something like this in the cinema. And I was like, yes, the animation's brilliant. Um, and I think that the idea is very cool. But also, I had this great moral issue with the conceit of the film that I don't think, because it's a TV series and because they were trying to cram so much into this film, that you can't really delve into, which is they're just killing these things that live in a different universe. Maybe it's delved into in series one a bit more, but in the film, no idea. These people are just given this almost God-given right to go and kill these monsters.
yeah,
Seems awfully suggestive to me. And they do it, and they do it brutally, and it is a very brutal film. That was quite cool. I quite like that. It didn't shy away from gore or extreme violence, and it is extremely violent. And in the opening sequence, it's very screamy as Sung Jin Woo develops his skills. But he also has a tragic backstory that is touched upon and glanced upon throughout the film, as all these heroes do. It is very superhero coded. But yeah, did I enjoy it? I guess I enjoyed it like someone would enjoy a roller coaster. That it was, you get the highs and you get the lows, and it's a ride, and you're there you go a couple of loop de loops because you're going through different monsters, you go through a few different scenes and settings, and the characters are a little soulless to me though, I think.
oh,
And oh, they have no weight to them at all, and they are just like action figures. It's like I'm playing with my action figures here, and that's kind of cool. I think if it wasn't so violent, it'd be a good kids thing. And again, maybe the depth is in the TV series, or maybe it is just more about the spectacle rather than the deepness of it. But it does have those character moments
definitely.
that aren't really delved into, and there's conspiracy themes, and there's corruption, and again it's hard one to talk about because I think it's very cool, as you said, Ruben. It's very cool. It's like Power Rangers.
Yeah.
It's all these sort of things that big pompous out there. But again, it took me until almost halfway through the film to be like, okay, I kind of understand what's going on. I would highly recommend it. The big problem to me was that the character was flawless. He couldn't be defeated. Even when he seemed to fail, it was only for a fraction of a second before he got up and killed everyone whilst yelling. Um,
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, I thought that was, for me, the big problem with this film is it doesn't particularly have a sense of jeopardy because, as you say, and I imagine in the TV show, because there are I think like 10 episodes of that. I think you probably get, you know, enriched characters and you get a sense of who these people are and you get a sense of why their lives matter. But honestly, you're watching this film and you're just like, that person there, that person there with the nice armor. Don't know who you are. Don't know why you're significant, but I'm sure you are. Nobody has any really defining characteristics. You either think, oh, they're a goodie, or oh, they're a baddie, and that's kind of it. And it
yeah.
means that you don't necessarily care about the fights, and that it is an issue. One thing that is, I think, perhaps a problem when you condense a television series into a film is that you essentially have the structure of the episodes, which presumably all feature like a fight. But because you're trimming out the fat, you lose all of the bits between the fights. So this essentially just flows from one battle into another in a way that I did find a little bit tiring. It is 2 hours long, and I sort of think either should have been longer or they should have cut out some fights, honestly, because I'd have liked it more, I think, if I had had more characters to invest in. But at the same time, there is a bit of battle fatigue happening because we essentially roll from, kind of mini climax to mini climax to mini climax to mini climax to end of series climax to mini climax to climax. And then literally the film ends on a cliffhanger, which I'll never see the end of because I'm not going to watch series 2 of this, and there won't be another film recapping the end of series 2. I presume, maybe there will be. So I don't think it's necessarily a very satisfying cinematic experience.
I agree. And I think the only thing, if you read into it more, maybe, is this sense of the main character has this sort of warped sense of domination, of power, hungry madness, of ownership of other people, of other things, and he kills and then dominates and steals souls from people as well, and then treats them as equals. And the character could be really interesting in the sense that he is portrayed as this sort of kind of anti-hero, more on the side of hero, but it's going that way. But as you said, it doesn't convince me to watch the rest of the series. I kind of like the ride, but I won't be leveling up.
Yeah, that's exactly it, isn't it? I think that at the end of the film, I sort of had this sense of, okay, well, that was fun, but there's a part of me that thinks, you could almost re-edit it as maybe 2 series, and it would be so unbelievably intense, it would be fine. And that would be more of a battle. I think it is a problem that it doesn't really have an ending. But I actually do think that I would, as you say, recommend it to somebody because it's certainly very cool and it has that very satisfying, I think, kind of Matrix X moment where Neo, realizes that he's God and he can stop bullets, right? And it kind of has a couple of moments through the film where you're like, oh wow, oh now they're in trouble because he is super powerful. And I did find those really satisfying. I think there is something really satisfying about kind of seeing an underdog suddenly being like unbelievably strong. And so it kind of tickled me in that way. But fundamentally, yeah, as you say, it's all middle. It's all battles with a tiny bit of world building thrown in. And honestly, if there'd been more world building and more characters, and listen, give it another 30 minutes of runtime, I think I'd have had a much better time because I'm sure those characters and that world building are there, and I was intrigued about the universe that this takes place in. But it wasn't ultimately a coherent story.
No, I absolutely agree. I feel like the strongest of what it presented was that it was just battle after battle and they were visually stunning. But you are completely right in the sense that what it lacked really made it an ineffective film. Like it didn't work as this package that it delivered. It had no character development. It had no inciting incident. It had nothing and no world building. And I think it is such an interesting, crazy world. Where does all this stuff come from? Is he deranged or is he controlled by a higher power? Is God a PS5? Who knows? But hey, go watch it. Go watch it. Cinema Spotlight viewers, and tell us what you think.
Next up, we are going to be talking about the very awards garlanded On Becoming a Guinea Fowl. It's directed by Rungano Nyoni, who last made I Am Not a Witch, and it was nominated for Uncertain Regard at Cannes and won Best Director. It tells the story of Shula, a young woman who discovers the body of her uncle when driving home late at night. And the story then delves into her family and the relationship that they all had with this deceased family member. I thought it was really intriguing. It has a kind of comic absurdist tone to begin with, but that starts to change as the film darkens. Jake, tell me, what did you think of this?
Now, this is a very severe movie, I think might be a good word to use it. It reminded me a lot, and this might set the tone for the people listening, is that it reminded me a lot of Schindler's List, in the sense of its where it went with how the undercurrent of grief and pain and terror and misery. Actually, there was an undercurrent of misery almost throughout the entirety of the film. You're right that it begins very comedically absurd, but then once you put that in context later, having viewed the entire film, it then changes everything. Is that a good thing? I'm not quite sure. I'm still sitting with the movie. It's one of those ones that you do actually have to sort of bask in as much as you might not want to, because it is an uncomfortable watch. It's shot beautifully. The performances are very engaging, and the conceit of it all is that I understood what was going to go on. I saw almost did from the very beginning, and it really does delve into some really dark moments in family dynamics, family politics, tradition, and how difficult that can be, maintaining that when faced with revelations about people's character. And I went in completely blind, and I only had ever seen that little short picture of her driving in the car. And I was like, oh, this is going to be something wacky, crazy. BFI is where I went to see it showing there. It's going to be an interesting watch. And it was. It really was. And I was moved in a sense of, I felt the character's plight, but it felt like we couldn't do anything. Quite like the abuse that these characters suffered. You know it's coming. You know it's going to be talked about. And it's just revealed how in depth and all encompassing it really is. And it is uncomfortable. There's no any sense of relief in this film. Maybe in the conclusion, but even then I don't think it really concludes. It quite leaves things open-ended. It is it batters you. This film, it really does rain upon you in this sort of thing, slowly at first, and then you just sort of in the snowball of that, it's these terrible things happen. It's a very difficult film to sort of take in. I sort of sat in the cinema after when the credits were rolling, and so I thought all the elements, everything worked, and the performances are brilliant. But I would love to know your opinion, Reuben. I really would. I think I'll pass it off to you to just sort of give your own context of how you felt about the film.
Yeah, I think, like you, I'm still working out how I feel about it because it's a really tricky thing, I think, when you watch a film and you go, okay, I recognize that the story it's telling is important and well crafted. And technically, the film is completely outstanding. I also really admired the score. And I thought that actually a lot of the kind of the cinematography and the production design were really interesting. And I think the film is actually quite subjective also at times. And we get these moments, as I mentioned, of kind of surrealism and almost magical realism. And I think weirdly, this film and Nightbitch can sort of sit alongside each other because they're both about the way that society and the systems that exist within it fundamentally are failing women because they create a hierarchy and they create a way of life that means that when an abuse happens, women are unable to speak out. And also, they both share a kind of animal imagery and almost a metamorphosis storyline. I also thought, though, that it was a very, very tough watch because it is very thorough and it is very much taking its time. But I also think it's quite a tough watch because it is no fun.
Yeah.
And you said, use the word miserable. I was lulled into the first, sort of act of this film, thinking, oh, this is absurdist and this is comedic, and sure, there's a darkness to it, but it's articulating those things through comedy, and that lasts, I would say, until about halfway through the film, at which point it becomes very, very serious. And I just found it quite a slog because it was emotionally difficult to watch because it's a tough plot line. I mean, I think there was a point where I felt myself becoming numb to it almost, and almost like having to switch off because to remain so emotionally engaged with a very difficult storyline, I was struggling with. But it certainly impacted how I kind of experienced the second half of the film, which was very much as a kind of difficult slog towards a conclusion which doesn't really offer catharsis necessarily and doesn't necessarily have enough of a concretely uplifting ending for me to feel anything but just sort of humbled and cynical about the world when it finished. It does, I think, shine best when it leans into the magical realism, and the final frames certainly do that and are, I think, a really striking endpoint. But because it is so committed to telling an important story and getting into the weeds of that story and looking at and interrogating the way in which these societal structures silence women, I think it loses a lot of audience engagement, honestly.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And you're right. It is a good companion piece to Nightbitch. It really is. And it was very interesting that the cultural differences were both interesting and quite eye-opening as well. The culture of the family, of Shula's family, and their grieving practices, their funeral practices. It's very interesting to see just from that sort of that side of things, just to see the sort of format and how the two sort of sides of the family of the uncle who dies, widow, and their family, and how they're ostracized and forced against, and it is relentless in every harsh thing it's trying to, and it does it so effectively. It's set out to effectively communicate the perils of I think negligence. Really, I think that's the real thing. Abuse is throughout the film, but and negligence is a form of abuse. Negligence from people who are supposed to love you.
Yes,
And
and fundamentally also, I think patriarchy, right? Because
yeah,
that's not just in that kind of abuse storyline, but we also just see it generally in the way that the women are. You know, they're always cooking, they're always cleaning, they're always serving the men. Everything comes second to the needs of the men.
yeah, and it's interesting that there's very few men in this film, and there was very few men in Nightbitch as well. A very interesting approach, and I think both effective in that, in the lack of male representation in a positive way. And I think you only see more male characters coming when they're dealing with the almost legal sides of the will, almost, which is the only way I could put it
Yeah.
in Western terms, or the UK terms, is that they sort of divvy up the items of belongings, but it is vicious. It's absolutely vicious. And everything is vicious in this film. Like, even the relationships of the cousins. And what is good about this is that the relationships of the younger characters are, even though we don't know that much about anyone, that really is, we don't know much about what they really do, or Shula more so, but everyone else is kind of, we see them as if we were meeting them the first time at a funeral, or the first time in a long time. We are very fly on the wall here, but they are very layered to deliver these performances of people I can understand are family members. They really do effectively show that, and therefore create a sense of community and this pain that really does resonate, and resonated with everyone who was sat in the cinema I saw it in. There was an air, an atmosphere after it. But you're right, it was a slog. And I think we discussed before we decided to hit record that this film isn't very long. It's an hour and 39 minutes, but it felt 2.5 hours to me.
I think that's where almost the comparison to Schindler's List you made really makes sense. It requires a lot of you as a viewer. You have to be emotionally and intellectually really switched onto it, which is completely fine. You know, I'm not saying that that is a bad thing at all, but it certainly means that as an experience, it is quite tiring. And this is almost a film where I think, you know, it's an important film, and I certainly left the cinema feeling like you know, it was really thought provoking, and I wanted to have a conversation with someone else who'd watched it to really digest it. But it certainly is quite laborious when you're watching it, and that's sort of a shame, because I think that it potentially could have told this story and maintained the comedic overtones that perhaps would have made it more accessible. I think that's really what I'm talking about here, is accessibility, because I think most people won't watch this film. Not because it's not been critically acclaimed, because it absolutely has been, but because it's heavy. And I think that is kind of a shame, because I think that this is a film that people should see and should have conversations then with their friends about. But I think a lot of people will just be turned off by the emotional requirements of it. And again, I mean, that's not the film's fault. I'm not criticizing the film for that. It is technically extremely admirable, and I was particularly impressed by Susan Shardy, who plays Shula. I thought she gave a completely wonderful performance. But if you are going to be so emotionally and intellectually invested in a film, I think it has to be a little bit more accessible. I think it has to be a little bit easier for you to absorb and to process.
Yes, I completely agree. And you're right that, if I'm not sure how, because I wouldn't want them to rob from the what the actual message is. It gets the message across very, very firmly. However, it starts so comedic. People were laughing. And then you say it happened halfway through the film, but I think even on looking back, it happens almost immediately after that scene, after the very opening, that then it's just this snowball of just pain. Then I'm questioning whether the intent was comedic at the very beginning. I think it must have been like the creators know that that would have come across that way. And I guess it is really interesting when the whole version of a film that you thought you were going to see then just gets upended immediately. It's subversive, it really is. And the through line was interested. I quite liked the reason why it's called On Becoming a Guinea Fowl. I thought that was effective. Maybe it should, as you said, should have delved into the magical realism a little more and underlined that bit, because that I could find myself connecting with a bit more, taking you out of the film for a brief moment and then to come back, just as a slight gasp of air before you have to go back into it. But as you said, recommend it if you're in the right place for it, really.
Yeah, I totally agree. Only if you're in the right place for it, because I think this is also, I think a lot of people will see it and they will really get a lot from it. But I think it's also potentially very upsetting. So yes, I would recommend, but with an informed caution, I think.
Our final film we're talking about this week is Rumours. The G7 are meeting up to write a joint statement after an undisclosed crisis has happened across the world. Each character is a slightly heightened version of the G7 members, and strange things occur. I think that's all I can really say, Reuben, because I think we should just delve into full on deep end about Rumours. So tell me, what do you think?
Yeah, so this was a really strange film, but it is deliberately deeply strange. It's not necessarily interested, as some films are, in being quote unquote good. What it is a proper piece of art. It wants to be provocative. It wants to be, above all else, it wants to be interesting. And it certainly achieves that goal. It's a really, really strange film. It is full of, kind of grotesque images, like a giant brain, kind of growing out of the forest floor. We have these kind of recurring creatures that are preserved bodies from bogs. It has a real kind of magical, realist, absurdist humor to it that is really odd, but quite compelling. So I would say I quite like this. I enjoyed watching it for its strangeness and for the fact that it takes really big swings, both tonally and plot-wise, that are so crazy you can't help but admire it. So I think that's how I feel. I really admire it as a piece of brave, out there, crazy, experimental, creative art, which is exactly what I want cinema to be doing. And not everything has to be perfect. And friends, this film is not perfect. It is deeply flawed. But overall, I love that it's taking these big swings, even if, at least half of them are misses. So I enjoyed this. I thought that it was really fascinating to watch a film which is drawing attention to its own artifice all the time, right? So, from the opening frames, we are kind of being bashed over the head with a very in your face, very kind of on the nose score, for example. All of the lighting is deliberately incredibly fake. It all looks like studio lighting, and we have this kind of sequence all set in a little summer house, essentially, in the middle of this lovely, beautiful country house grounds that they're visiting this chateau. And at no point does the backlight hitting everybody's head remotely match the greenery surrounding them. It's things like that. It's drawing attention to its artifice. And so I think you have to watch this film and embrace it as the strange beast that it is.
This film is really interesting. I loved that it looked the way it did. I love when films are more theatrical, more artifice. This film was like a B-movie. Intentionally so, like, and an absurd one. Someone found a camera, had some money, didn't know what they were doing, made a film. Like, the costumes looked bad, like, on purpose.
Terrible costumes.
Costumes. The performances were hammy in the right way. I enjoyed the performances. That, I think, is my favorite part of the film, is that everyone is delivering what they were told to give. And that's where I have a little bit of a problem, which I'll come into a bit later. But the actual artifice, the score, the lighting, I adored. I loved that everything was broken. The world made no sense. Everything was bathed in colors that are impossible in natural world, and I loved it. I genuinely thought that it had the production design and the place that they filmed, and the sort of very much all the scenery, all the fake and real scenery was chewed to an inch of its life by every single actor, more or less, in the film. However, there's a few things that really stuck out to me, that it is this big political satire, but it doesn't really know what it's saying. And I think that's part of its charm, but therefore it falls into the problem of a bunch of mates coming together to create a studenty type film. It felt very student film to me, and I was a student filmmaker. I have made those films in my life, that, oh, we'll just make whatever. Oh, it doesn't quite make sense in the script, but we find it funny, so we'll put it in the film. And some of that really worked. The absurdist representation of politicians is always hilarious. All of them had moments of just to shine. And there were slight moments of actual satire. Charles Dance's character was too old and falling asleep, and the German chancellor was too eager to please. And I think the British prime minister was very concerned about structure, but no content. So you could read into a lot of it about what the creators' views of leadership and politics of each country was, but then there are some aspects that made absolutely no sense whatsoever and would just seem tacked on to me. I love the idea of this giant brain in the wood. I love the idea of this sort of coming apocalypse and these clueless politicians have to solve it. The conceit and the aesthetic delivery is brilliant, and I think it's cast really well. But there are some stupid, and I mean genuinely stupid, decisions that seemed to me like the three directors on the day were like, oh, that could be funny. We're just going to throw that in. Charles Dance's accent is one of them. And that's the only thing that really they've written about in sort of like trivia, or the director said, no, use your British accent. We want to subvert the audience. And then Charles Dance really wanted it to be explained in the film because he's an actor. Of course he can do accents. But to me, it really does feel like just a random choice that doesn't connect with this universe they're creating. And it seems like a small thing, but it just feels incongruous. It really does. That all these characters are very representative of a almost stereotypical version of themselves. The Canadian Prime Minister is very liberal, gorgeous, sort of one with the forest, sort of very gung-ho gentleman that everyone is in love with. And that's another problem. The female representation in this film is dreadful. They're just madly in love and want to have sex with the Canadian Prime Minister. And I guess I can see people saying, well, actually, we're making fun of lead politicians. Politicians, they're easy targets, very easy targets, because you don't know any context of how they got elected, who they run for, what their politics really are. There is no understanding of what this crisis is. And I know that that's a conscious decision to sort of lead us astray, but it sort of then starts working against the film because the whole point it feels very vapid, it feels very empty, and it's a little directionless. Funny in how absurd it is, but then you have to sort of try and find the connective tissue. This film, as much as I half loved it, I half hated it for those problems.
I agree. I think it's very, very uneven. And I do think that it sort of has things to say. I mean, I actually think that the final scene, which is one of the maddest things I think I've ever watched, but I was watching it just thinking, like, I can't believe that I'm watching a film where, and I'm not spoiling it, where X is happening. Like, this is absolutely nuts. But it's gloriously nuts. And I think that there is the vaguest of kind of messages in there, which is, the reason, and I think this explains Charles Dance's accent, the reason why the whole film is incongruous is because it wants to draw attention to that artifice, and it wants the whole picture to feel like none of the parts mesh together, and they don't. And I think that's because it's making a comment, albeit a very blunt one, about the way in which all of this bureaucracy, all of this pointless, time-wasting, democratically elected leaders going off and having a little chat and then making a bunch of pledges that they won't actually follow through on. It's talking about how the political system doesn't work and doesn't make sense. That's not a profound point, but I think that is actually what the film is talking about. It's just using that as a springboard throughout the film to have fun. And that's ultimately, I think, the good thing about it. And I actually would recommend people go and watch this for this reason. It's really creative. It's fun to see. Essentially, as you say, an art house B-movie being done in this way with these A-list casts. And I think that there are some good performances in that. I agree that they're over the top and they're deliberately bad. But I also think that you get just enough pathos from most of those characters that you do feel empathetic towards them. I actually did quite like Kate Blanchett's character. There's an incredibly funny sequence where they're trying to write this statement about a very ambiguous crisis that never gets explained, where she's talking about the fact that she used to be an actor and she thinks maybe they could use some lines from her play where she was a sort of genocidal Nazi. I thought that there was, enough of a balance between it being funny and you're laughing at them and funny where you're laughing with them for you to kind of get along with it. And there's kind of a nice little storyline involving the kind of the Charles Dance president and him maybe being towards the end of his life, but there being new life in the old dog yet. I'm sort of clutching at straws because the whole thing is so uninterested, I would say, in having a message. It's quite anarchistic in its approach to filmmaking because it just wants to put a load of insane stuff on screen and sort of have you work out what you want to do with it. But there is real value in that, and I'm actually surprised, having watched it yesterday and kind of having sat with it for a day, how fondly I think of it, because it does have problems. It doesn't really go anywhere. It's not necessarily gripping, but overall, as a kind of mad piece of art, I think it's quite good. I like it, and yeah, I would recommend the right people. If this sounds like a bit of you, go and seek it out, and particularly if you have a taste for kind of pulp, I think this will be up your street.
You know what it reminds me of, and just thinking of it now, is that I've spent a lot of time at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival.
Yeah.
Reminds me of the funny, pretentious university students putting on a play that some funny, pretentious university students as well will find absolutely engaging. They will love it. They will rave about it. But Joe Bloggs on the street will think it's the worst piece of nonsense ever put on screen. I'm all for pretentiousness and it is deliberately so. As you say, the incongruity is deliberate, but in a way goes too far, because I do actually love the story, I think. And I like what you said. Fond is a good word. Fond. I am fond of the film, but I want to, come on, get your act together and just make a decent point. Or if you're not making a point, then just dedicate a bit more time to develop some bits that are lacking a bit. Like, some of the characters are a little underdone. I think the US president doesn't really do much. He has some really nice scenes with the Italian prime minister. That's really sweet, actually. That's a very sweet character and sincerely performed and earnestly done. That's the thing. All the performances I believe in, but it is annoying. That's the film. It's not quite there. Like, maybe it was supposed to annoy me. Maybe it is really a prank on the audience as well. As you say, it is completely artificial. But I don't think that means that it should exist without a bit more heft. Like, Wes Anderson films are completely artificial from every point of view, and the performances are heightened in the same way. Yet I connect with those characters and I connect with what it's trying to say. Maybe because that's more hopeful. I felt that, these characters... Some of the characters displayed great humanity, and some of them were very parody. And I loved the characters. I can't say I hated them, but I just felt something missing. It was a joke I wasn't in on. And you're right, the jokes were they're there. Do they work? No. I don't think the film works. Do I hate it? No. Would I recommend it? Not to my mother. No.
Yeah.
To my pretentious film peers from my university, maybe I would, and maybe they'll love it. They've probably already seen it. But yes, but on a very positive note, I'm very glad it got made, like you said. I'm so glad, because these are the type of films, this removal, actually using film as a medium to get a point across, even if the point's labored or broken or doesn't quite work, or they don't really know. I also think it seems like it was made up built in it feels like this is a second draft script. It's not a final draft. It feels like this is a made in the edit sort of thing. This is, the actors are doing a lot of the heavy lifting to actually deliver the comedy. The comedy isn't there apart from the performances, I think. Yeah, it left me feeling a little empty, but also amazed that it got made. And I would love more films to be made like this. We've watched quite a lot of very realistic films recently, And I am very for this surrealist approach. I think we need more surrealist films that get a showing in cinemas. And I think some of its creative choices were brilliant, and some of it was absolute trash. And I would highly recommend it because of that.
Yeah.
Having that conversation, yeah, I would.
And that brings us to the end of today's episode. So tell me, Jake, what was your film of the week?
Now, this has been a very interesting discussion that we've shared because I think I changed my mind during the episode. I think I was coming in being like, I don't actually know what I'm going to recommend because I had such weird relationship with all four of the films. And I thought, well, maybe, for a bit of fun, I could recommend Solo Leveling, Reawakening. It's something that I'm not used to, but I'm not going to recommend that. I think I've been convinced. No, go see Rumours. Please do. It's bonkers and it's broken, but see it and tell us what you think. Be outraged by it. Fall around in guffaws of laughter if you find it that way, or just be apathetic about it. I think it's one of those films that actually needs to be discussed to make more films like it, because people need to make those movements in these sort of different genres. Film needs to be explored a bit more, I think, in my opinion, so we don't get trite like Red One, mentioning it again. But I think actually it will hopefully do legwork for a brighter future in slightly more bizarre and abstract cinema. So yeah, go see it. Go see it and hate it if you must. But I think I may have loved it.
Listen, I actually would recommend all of the films that we've watched this week. I think they're all really good. I would recommend Nightbitch because I think it's really, really good fun. And also it's a good story and it's well told. I think that Amy Adams just continues to be completely perfect in everything she's in. So go and see Nightbitch. It may not be on the same level of Marielle Huller's previous films, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it had real value to it. And it's a great conversation starter as well. I had a really good conversation with my girlfriend afterwards about the film and about its messaging. And I just think that so many people will also have that experience where it starts a discussion which is rewarding and interesting and fun. So go and watch Night Bitch. Go and watch Rumours. Go and watch On Becoming a Guinea Fowl. Go and watch Solo Leveling Reawakening, the most incoherent title of the week. That's for sure. So yeah, it's been a great week, frankly, and we will see you at the cinema. Thank you so much for watching. We will see you next week.
Yes, we're going to be talking about Queer, Lord of the Rings, War of the Rohirrim, and also Craven the Hunter.
Please do like, subscribe, and leave a comment over on YouTube. Or if you're an audio listener, make sure that you're following us on Spotify.
And make sure, if you're an up-and-coming filmmaker or a local cinema who want to get spotlighted, please email us at cinemaspotlight, Jake and Reuben, at gmail.com.